She never imagined loyalty could feel like a debt. Eleanor Hayes learned that on her first morning inside the Calder estate, standing beneath ceilings so high they seemed designed to remind visitors how small they were. The house was not loud with wealth. There were no gold fixtures, no unnecessary displays. That restraint made it more intimidating. Money that did not need to prove itself had a different gravity. She was 32, carefully dressed, and already aware that one mistake could end her career. The Calder family did not hire archivists often. When they did, they chose people who understood discretion as instinct, not instruction. A woman in her late 60s met her in the West Corridor. Margaret Calder, widow matriarch. Her presence was quiet but commanding, the kind that did not raise its voice because it had never needed to. "You'll find everything here has a history," Margaret said as they walked. "Some of it is celebrated, some of it is protected." Eleanor understood the meaning immediately. Protected meant buried. Her job was to catalog letters, contracts, recordings, private correspondence stretching back nearly a century. The Calder name was woven into banking, infrastructure, political donations, and charities that bore smiling faces and clean slogans. To the public, they were American royalty without crowns. To Eleanor, they were a system built on memory control. She worked in silence for weeks, often alone, sometimes with the soft hum of security cameras reminding her she was never entirely unseen. She did her work well. She always had. Precision was her safety. It was during her third week that she first noticed Daniel Crowe. He was standing near the archive room doorway one evening, leaning casually against the frame, not watching her hands, not checking a screen, just present. "Long day," he said, more statement than question. She nodded. "They all are." He smiled slightly. No forced politeness, no curiosity that overstepped. "I'm Daniel. Security rotation L." "That's a dangerous room you're in," he said, glancing at the shelves behind her. "Paper cuts?" she asked. "Truth," he replied, then left before the comment could become awkward. It should have ended there. It rarely did. They crossed paths again and again, in hallways, at odd hours, always brief, always measured. Daniel never asked what she worked on, never hinted at curiosity. That restraint mattered more than charm. Slowly, conversation stretched, about ordinary things, about how strange it felt to live inside someone else's wealth, about how silence could feel heavier than noise. Daniel had grown up far from places like this. He said it without bitterness, just fact. He worked security because he trusted systems more than people. Eleanor understood that too well. Their connection grew quietly, carefully, like something that knew it was not allowed to exist. The estate noticed. Margaret Calder invited Eleanor to tea one afternoon, her tone warm but deliberate. Power always sounded polite when it wanted obedience. "You seem settled," Margaret said. "We value stability here." "I value it too," Eleanor replied. Margaret studied her for a moment. Be careful not to confuse familiarity with belonging. The warning was gentle, the meaning was not. Still, Eleanor stayed, and so did Daniel. The first crack appeared on a night she wasn't meant to be in the lower archive. A misfiled key. A door that opened to eyes inside. She found a sealed collection marked only with a date and a red identifier she had never seen before. She knew she should leave it untouched. She didn't. The documents inside were old. Legal papers, testimonies, a name repeated again and again. A name Eleanor did not recognize, until she did. Crowe, Daniel's last name. Her breath caught as she read further. Accusations. Financial ruin. A man blamed for a collapse he did not cause. A scandal absorbed quietly. The Calder name untouched. Another life erased to preserve the illusion of perfection. Eleanor closed the folder with shaking hands. She understood the shape of the truth before she understood its details. Love had already chosen a side, and loyalty was about to demand payment. Eleanor did not sleep that night. The name followed her into every quiet space, every breath between thoughts. Crowe, she had archived thousands of documents over the years, learned to separate ink from consequence. This time, the separation refused to hold. By morning, she had returned the folder to its place exactly as she had found it. No marks, no traces. The archive rewarded obedience, but memory did not. Daniel noticed immediately. "You look like someone took something from you," he said when they crossed paths near the garden corridor. Eleanor forced a small smile. "Just tired." He studied her for a second longer than usual, then nodded. "If you ever need air, the North Terrace is quiet around dusk." It was an invitation that respected distance, that made it harder to refuse. They met that evening as the sun lowered behind the hedges. The estate looked gentler in that light, almost honest. For a moment, Eleanor wished the truth had stayed buried. Daniel leaned against the stone railing. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "But if something's wrong, I'd rather know you're not carrying it alone." She watched her hands, the words pressed against her chest, desperate to escape. Instead, she asked, "What do you know about your father?" Daniel's posture shifted, subtle but immediate. "Enough," he said. "Why?" "I found records," Eleanor said, "from years ago, about a financial collapse tied to the Calder family." Daniel exhaled slowly. "That name follows a lot of ghosts. Your father's name is in them." Silence settled between them, heavier than Eleanor expected. Daniel didn't react with anger or shock, just a stillness that felt practiced. "They blamed him," he said finally. "Said he cut corners, lied. He died believing that." Eleanor nodded. "The documents say otherwise." Daniel turned to her. "Do they prove it?" "Yes." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if steadying something inside himself. "Then they'll never see daylight." Eleanor didn't answer. The estate lights flickered on below them, orderly and bright. "They don't erase people loudly," Daniel continued. "They make it look deserved." She felt the weight of her position then. Archivist, witness, keeper of silences. "I didn't know when I took this job," she said. "I swear I believe you," Daniel replied. "That's not the hard part." The days that followed were marked by pressure disguised as concern. Margaret Calder requested more frequent updates. Access logs were reviewed. Eleanor's work was praised publicly, monitored privately. One afternoon, Margaret joined her in the archive room, her presence unannounced but unmistakable. "You're valuable to us," Margaret said, scanning the shelves as if they were an extension of her own memory. "Trust is rare." Eleanor's voice was steady. "I've never given you a reason to doubt mine." Margaret smiled faintly. "Trust is not about the past. It's about what someone might do when faced with temptation." The word lingered like a test. That night, Eleanor received an envelope slid under her apartment door within the estate. No sender. Inside was a simple contract, generous compensation, long-term security, a position elevated beyond archiving, and a clause, confidentiality, absolute, retroactive. She stared at it for a long time, understanding the offer clearly. Wealth in exchange for silence, protection in exchange for loyalty, not to truth, to power. When she showed Daniel, he didn't touch the paper. "They're buying your future," he said. "So the past stays buried." "They think money will end this," Eleanor replied. Daniel looked at her carefully. "It usually does." The following week, Eleanor noticed changes. Daniel's security shifts altered. Less proximity, more supervision, conversations shortened by circumstance. Isolation was never announced, it was engineered. Margaret invited Eleanor again, this time without pretense. "You have choices," Margaret said, pouring tea with practiced calm. "You can leave with our gratitude, or you can stay with our favor." "And Daniel?" Eleanor asked. Margaret's eyes lifted. "Daniel is not part of this equation. He is to me." "That is unfortunate," Margaret said softly. "Love complicates loyalty." The line was not a warning, it was a conclusion. That evening, Eleanor made her decision. She didn't steal documents, she didn't copy files. She memorized details, dates, names, transfers. She trusted herself more than systems. She arranged a meeting with an investigative journalist using an old academic contact. No emails, no devices tied to the estate, just a conversation and a promise. By the time the article broke, the Calder name was already bleeding quietly. Not a scandal, a slow unraveling. Questions raised, histories re-examined, donations declined, silence replaced by suspicion. Margaret called Eleanor immediately. "You've misunderstood your position," she said, voice colder than Eleanor had ever heard it. "No," Eleanor replied. "I finally understood it." Security arrived the next morning, polite, efficient. Eleanor was escorted out with a single suitcase. No confrontation, no accusation, just removal. Daniel met her at the gate. "They reassigned me," he said, effective immediately. She nodded. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "You told the truth." They left together without destination, without certainty. The Calder estate stood untouched behind them, still powerful, still wealthy. But something essential had cracked. And Eleanor knew that while money could silence many things, it could not undo loyalty freely given or love chosen at cost. They rented a small apartment miles away from the estate, in a part of the city where the buildings were older and the silence at night came from distance rather than control. The first few days felt unreal, like stepping out of a sealed room into open air that was too thin to breathe properly. Eleanor woke repeatedly, half expecting cameras, emails, warnings. None came. That absence was its own kind of noise. Daniel took temporary work. Nothing glamorous. Night shifts, consulting contracts that paid less than half of what he once earned. He did not complain. He never framed it as loss. That, more than anything, unsettled Eleanor. She had walked away from money that could have insulated her for life. Daniel had never asked her to. He had only stood beside her choice. The story continued to unfold without them. News outlets did not use dramatic language. They rarely do when power is involved. The Calder family was not accused, not charged, not publicly shamed. Instead, their image softened in places it once stood sharp. Long-accepted narratives became under review. Former associates distanced themselves quietly. Donations slowed. Influence thinned. Truth rarely arrives like an explosion. It arrives like erosion. Eleanor followed it from a distance, resisting the urge to track every mention, every update. She understood now that exposure did not guarantee justice. It only created space where justice might someday breathe. One afternoon, Daniel came home holding a thin folder. "I found something," he said. Inside were letters, handwritten, old, his father's words. Copies he had never seen. They had surfaced after the article, sent anonymously by someone who had held them for decades and finally felt safe enough to let them go. Daniel read them slowly, carefully, as if touching something fragile that had survived longer than it should have. He knew, Daniel said quietly. He knew what they were doing. Eleanor watched his face, the grief threaded with relief. Vindication does not erase pain. It only changes its shape. "You didn't get justice," Eleanor said. "Not really." Daniel looked at her. "I got truth. That's more than I had yesterday." Weeks passed, then months. Life became smaller. And then, gradually, fuller. Eleanor found work again, this time with an independent historical review board. Less money, more transparency, no locked doors, no invisible clauses. She slept better. Daniel rebuilt his career slowly, choosing projects where loyalty meant protection rather than silence. They did not talk much about the Calder family anymore. Power that is ignored often fears that more than exposure. One evening, as they walked through a quiet street lit by uneven lamps, Eleanor stopped. "Do you ever think about what we gave up?" she asked. Daniel considered the question seriously. "I think about what we didn't give up." She nodded. That answer settled something inside her. Months later, Eleanor received a message from an unknown number. No threat, no offer, just a single sentence. "You were right to choose truth." She deleted it without replying, because validation from power always comes too late and asks for something in return. The Calder name still existed. Money rarely disappears. It just changes strategy. But the illusion of moral perfection was gone, and Eleanor understood now how fragile those illusions really were. Royalty without crowns depends on belief, and belief, once broken, never fully returns. One morning, sitting at a small kitchen table cluttered with ordinary things, coffee cups, notes, sunlight, Eleanor realized something quietly profound. She was no longer afraid, not of surveillance, not of consequence, not of being erased. She had lost wealth, she had lost protection. She had lost a future someone else had designed for her. What remained was hers. Daniel reached across the table, squeezing her hand. There was no grand declaration, no cinematic moment, just presence, just loyalty that did not require payment. Money had tried to buy her silence. Power had tried to redefine her worth. In the end, neither had succeeded. And that, Eleanor understood, was the rarest victory of all.